Hi, we already discussed what risks are, and we identified our risk and saved our risk in a repository, in our risk log being the repository. Now, we also discussed that risk analysis is critical to prioritize risk, to see what risk you need to address immediately and what risk you can address later. We define or we established that there are two kinds of analysis. There is qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. So for this video, we will be discussing quantitative analysis. The essence of quantitative analysis is to assign a risk score. And when you assign a risk score to all identified risks, you can then prioritize them based on from highest to lowest, pretty much. Now, the way we do our calculation, it involves a little bit of math. And the math that we need to do is to multiply our risk impact by our risk probability. Now, the risk impact is the financial impact on our product or on our solution, which could be how much it will cost us to rectify the problem or how much financial losses we will suffer if the risk becomes active, if the risk happens. Now, another way we could also use our risk impact is to use a scale. I understand that not all risk comes in monetary value. So we could use a scale of 1 to 10 to define our risk impact. And we could go with 1 being very minimal impact on the quality of the product or the quality of the solution, and 10 being the highest impact on the solution or the product. And at 10, what it means is it makes your product ineffective. There's no point going ahead with the product if you have a risk impact of 10. Now, the other term that we need to define is our risk probability. And probability is simply the chances of occurrence. And what we do with the probability is we measure it in percentage terms. So we could have various categories of risk probabilities. So we could start with very high. At very high, we could decide to go with 90% probability for the chances of occurrence at very high. Now, the other category under our risk probability could be high at 75%. We could also go with medium probability at 50% and low probability at 25%. And then we could end it all with a very low probability of 5%. There are no set rules on setting different categories. Some organizations will decide to go with just high, medium, and low. And some organizations will go with the 5 categories I mentioned, which are very high, high, medium, low, and very low. So any organization could decide on the number of categories they want to go with. Another thing they have free rein to decide on is the percentage assigned to each category. So I went with 90%, 75%, 50, 25, and 5%. An organization could decide to go with whatever works with them. The key thing is to show the different levels, to go from high to low. So what it means is your percentage for high probability should be higher than your percentage for low probability. But you pretty much have free rein to assign different categories and different probabilities as you see fit. Now, in doing our quantitative analysis, remember that our goal is to assign a risk score to each risk. Now, in doing this, from my experience, I've seen that the best way to handle this analysis is to see them as mutually exclusive. And what I mean by mutually exclusive is to consider each risk at a time. The analysis could get complex when we begin to make dependencies, when we begin to see risk A and risk B and risk C happening at the same time. Now, if that happens, it gets more complicated to assign a risk impact and a risk probability to. So one thing that helps in risk analysis, in quantitative risk analysis, is to see each risk as mutually exclusive. Think about each risk individually and assign your risk impact and your risk probability accordingly. So we're going to go back to our example on the wedding ceremony. All right, so we're going to take each risk that we elicited in our previous examples and assign a risk impact and a risk probability to them. So let's go with the couple being late. That was one of the identified risks for a wedding ceremony. One of the things that could go wrong in a ceremony is the couple getting there late. So for this risk, I will be assigning a risk impact of 5. Remember that we're going, for this example, we really can't place a monetary value to the couple being late. So for this wedding example, we're just going to go with our scale of 1 to 10. 1 being very minimal impact and 10 being the highest impact that makes your solution impossible or ineffective. So for the couple being late, I probably will go with a risk impact of 5, all right, somewhere along the middle. It's, as long as the couple comes, if they arrive late, that's bad, but the wedding will probably still go on even if the couple arrive late. So I'll go with a risk impact of 5 for that. And now, perhaps based on the event planner interacting with the couple, maybe at meetings where they were going through planning, the couple arrived late and, all of that, the event planner could decide to assign a risk probability of 50%. All right, so now we have a risk impact of 5 and a risk probability of 50%. Now, if we multiply 5 by 50%, that gives us a risk score of 2.5. Now let's go down our list of risks. The second risk on our list is our vendors getting there late. All right, so imagine the caterer getting there late, the makeup artist getting there late. That could really throw a wrench in your plans. So for this, I'm going to assign a risk impact of 7. All right, because if the couple is ready, remember we want to see each risk as mutually exclusive. So we're not going to see the couple getting there late and the vendors getting there late, although that's possible, but for the sake of our analysis, we'll take each individually and analyze individually. So for vendors getting there late, I have assigned a risk impact of 7 and a risk probability of 50%. So if we multiply 7 by 50%, that gives us a risk score of 3.5. The next risk we will be analyzing is poor decor or poor decorations or poor ambience at the ceremony. So for this, I would assign a risk impact of 4 and I would assign a risk probability of 25%. I kind of feel it has a lower probability of happening because before you decide to rent a hall or a venue, you must have gone to check it out and see whether the ambience is right for the ceremony. And before you hire a decorator, you must have seen their work. So that kind of informed my decision to go with a risk impact of 4 and a risk probability of 25%. So the risk score for that risk will be 4 multiplied by 25%, which gives us 1. The next risk we will be analyzing is bad food. Now, bad food could be really bad, or bad food could really impact the quality of the ceremony, rather. And for that, I've assigned a risk impact of 7 because when people come to your wedding, they want to enjoy the food, the wine, the cake. I believe food is a big part of the quality of a wedding ceremony. So I've assigned a risk impact of 7 for that. And the risk probability, I think I'll go with 25% for that risk probability because I also think before you hire a caterer, you must have tasted their food or they must have come via a recommendation from a friend and a family who must have tasted their food. So I'm kind of going with a risk probability of 25% for that one. So the risk score in this case will be 7 multiplied by 25%, which gives us a risk score of 1.75. Now, the final risk we will be analyzing will be weather conditions. a torrential heavy rainfall on the day of the wedding. And the assumption here is that the wedding is during the dry season or during summer when you do not expect a lot of rainfall. But you never know, it's the weather, there's global warming, and all of that although it's a distinct, or although it's a remote possibility, it's still possible. So for that one, I will go with a risk impact of 4, and I'll go with a risk probability of 5%. 5% representing the very low category in our risk probability, which we discussed earlier. So if we multiply 4 by 5%, that gives us a risk score of 0.2. So from doing these calculations, we see our various risk scores, and we see right off the bat that the risk score, the highest risk score, which represents the most impactful risk, which probably needs to be addressed immediately, the most impactful risk is the late vendors. All right, that could really throw a wrench in your plans. And the second highest probability is the couple getting there late, and the third being the bad food. So now we have our prioritized risk list, and now we could come up with strategies to manage this risk. We will be discussing that in a subsequent video. So subscribe to our channel and watch out for another video that we have on risk responses. Thank you for watching.